Should fairness be considered an important thing in golf course design? That's what I'm talking about today with PJ Clark in this installment of our Golf Architecture 101 series. I'm Garrett Morrison, and this is Designing Golf. All right, PJ, welcome back to the pod.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I love getting into the hot button issues of today. The number one hot topic on the PGA Tour on a weekly basis: fairness, and how do we achieve it? I'm ready to go.
Listen, some people say designing golf is too controversial. I say I want all the smoke. I want this podcast to be on the forefront.
Finger on the pulse here. I mean, this is the pulse of humanity today. Everything's got to be fair and down the middle. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, to start off, would you consider yourself a member of the Fairness Police?
I think like in a vacuum, probably. Like I think I'm too, my logical brain wants to be rewarded for good shots and penalized for bad shots. I don't want to say I disagree with a lot of what Scotty commonly says as I look up the ladder to my chief of the Fair Police here. But I understand the arguments against it, and that having some aspect of luck in a game of chance is, it's part of the game, right? That's why it's not played on a simulator, even though I guess now we do have a simulator golf league.
Seems like you already have pieces of the upcoming lesson lodged in your brain, probably because you've sat in on many discussions between Andy and Brendan on the Shotgun Start about fairness and golf course design, and Scotty Scheffler's comments on it. You know, the number one player in the world right now seems positively obsessed with the idea of fairness. Although he's not like Tyrrell Hatton. You know, whereas Hatton gets extremely angry at unfair elements in golf courses, even though he is a great player at the old course. Tyrrell Hatton always baffles me. It's like he's best at doing what he hates, which I guess is a sort of curse, and kind of maybe explains his touchy personality.
But
it's
not a major championship until Tyrrell Hatton throws a tantrum on a golf hole that he doesn't like. It's kind of like a badge of honor these days.
It's a tradition at this point. But in any case, fairness does commonly come up in discussions of professional golf right now, and it's one of those areas where I think golf architecture nerds and people who just follow the pro tours and that's it. It's one of those areas where they cross over and kind of maybe end up in discussion with each other. And I think there are very different perspectives on both sides of that divide, which is why I think this topic is really interesting. So why don't we start off with the basic question here? What do you think it means for a golf course to be fair?
I think good shots should be rewarded with either, kicks down the fairway or short lies or good lies or angles into the green. We've talked about angles plenty on this series so far. But I also think misses should be penalized. Now, I think where I'm going to get myself into trouble is when you gave me this prompt to think about. I think I kind of agree with the Scotty line of thinking, logically, that it should be gradual based on how bad your miss is. Further misses should be further penalized than closer misses, if that makes sense. The penalty should be exponential to how bad the shot is.
This is something that a lot of pros believe, and that actually our colleague Joseph Lamagna talks about a lot. Joseph gets frustrated by courses where wide misses are not as penalized as just as penalized as narrow misses, right? And Torrey Pines often comes up as an example of this kind of golf course where it doesn't matter if you miss the fairway by 5 yards or by 50 yards. It's going to be a similar situation because what you have out there is just a lot of green irrigated rough, And once you're off the fairway, it just doesn't really matter that much where you are in that rough. And that, in Joseph's mind, as someone who analyzes professional tournament courses, is frustrating and an indication of ineffective tournament course design. I'm going to try to introduce some complexity to that idea in this podcast, maybe, and bring up some challenges to it, but it certainly stands to reason, right? Mm-hmm. It seems like a reasonable proposal that should be how we go about testing golfers.
It doesn't make sense that if you miss the fairway by 5 yards and you miss the fairway by 50 yards, that even, I mean, at some of these courses, we were looking at it when we were at Oakmont, like if you blew it way left on one into where the galleries were, you had the trampled down rough that you could hit off of pretty easily. Like that doesn't make sense, that you should be quote unquote rewarded for a worse shot. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's an issue of fairness. This is the essence of what we're talking about when we talk about fairness and golf course design. And this kind of stuff drives professionals especially crazy because their whole life is geared toward executing golf shots well, hitting the ball well. They study and they bleed for their entire lives to do that thing well. And when they show up at a golf course where that doesn't give them a significant advantage, or somebody who hasn't worked as hard and who doesn't hit the ball as well is ending up in similar or better positions than them, then that's going to be frustrating. This is something that Scotty Scheffler has talked about. It's an understandable frustration because if that's your life, then you want it to pay off. And so that seems to be the basis from which a lot of pro golfers criticize the unfairness of golf courses. It defies the very thing that they have worked hard to do. So kind of understandable.
I think it makes sense, right? If you're aiming small to miss small, and you do miss small, unfortunately, obviously no one is just blatantly trying to blow it in the rough. I mean, at some points, I guess you are, but that's a different discussion, I would probably say, with the course setup. But if you're aiming small to miss small and you miss small versus some guy that completely goes off the radar and he ends up in a better spot than you, I understand a level of frustration that would come with that. That would piss me off for sure.
Okay, so a couple of related ideas to this would be that fair golf courses are generally understood by the fairness police primarily to be the golf courses where the elements of randomness and luck are kept to a minimum. So it's not just golf courses are fair if they reward good shots and penalize bad shots. They're fair if there is if randomness is kind of kept out of it, because randomness is one of those things that can end up not rewarding good shots or not punishing poor shots, right? So randomness and luck are kind of opposed to these ideas that we're talking about.
I think that's where you kind of lose me, because again, like, it's an outdoor sport. There are bumps. There are bruises. There are mounds in the fairway. You're gonna get a bad kick. Like, this is not. It's an outdoor sport. Like, that would be my counter argument to that. Is that, like, yeah, you can draw it up correctly, and I would argue that the difference between 5 and 50 yards off the fairway should be different in a vacuum, but you can't. The randomness within that pocket 5 yards off the fairway, I think, should exist and is fair to exist because, again, it's an outdoor sport.
Okay, well, then what about fairness in the middle of a fairway?
Yeah, right. I mean, you can get a bad kick. You can land in a divot. Like, that's, again, this is like part of that to me is part of the game more than this course is not set up well. If that's a cohesive argument to you.
Well, it's maybe exactly the definition of an uncohesive argument. There's a contradiction here, isn't there? I'm not saying that it's wrong, But there's a contradiction here saying we want good shots to be rewarded and bad shots to be punished, but some element of randomness and luck is okay. Well, if you accept some element of randomness and luck, I guess the first question is how much of that? And the second question is, well, if we're accepting that, then you have to accept that if two players hit the exact same drive, they might end up in completely different positions, whether they're on the fairway or off the fairway. Even if you limit the randomness and luck to just off the fairway, say two players hit it to exactly the same place. Well, if that area is random and chancy, then they might end up in completely different situations.
Yeah, I mean, my counter argument to that would be just hit the fairway. Like that's what we're all trying to do, right? Like you could just that's kind of the get out of jail free card here. Is like, oh, if you don't like the wiregrass at Pinehurst last year, Scotty, just hit the fairway, man. Like it's kind of it's what we're all trying to do here at the end of the day. But I think where I understand the fair police argument is that it is not the penalties. I feel like sometimes are not proportional to a miss, but I think there is an element of randomness that in an outdoor sport is completely agreeable. I mean, you look at it at other sports like baseball. Every ballpark has different dimensions. You hit a ball that's going to be out at Yankee Stadium. That's a fly ball in somebody else's field. Like that's normal. Like that's part of sports. That's part of the game. But I do think on a mishit or on a miss, there should be greater penalties based on how bad it actually is.
Baseball is a good example because the field in baseball is, to a degree, very standardized, much more so than a golf course. Yeah. In baseball, you have the same dimensions of the diamond, but where the differences come in is that outfield wall, basically, and the overall size of the ballpark bounces off of the wall. Sometimes bounces off of the wall at a baseball stadium are very chancy and introduce an element of luck into the game that might not be there if the fields were completely standardized and had all of the same dimensions and all of the same structures around them. But so baseball does kind of welcome in that element of randomness, and golf, I would argue, lets in more.
Yeah. And for sure.
And so that is where the complexity and difficulty of this discussion arrives, because we have to ask, how much of this randomness are we willing to admit?
Well, it doesn't even have to be a golf course thing when you're thinking about tournament golf. Like in baseball, everybody is hitting in the same 2.5 to 3 hour window in the same stadium. But in golf, you're playing, 6 hours after somebody. The wind could change, the weather could change. It could be completely different. You're not playing the same. You're playing the same course on the ground, but you're not playing the same course as guys that went out in the morning or in the afternoon based on what wave you are. Whereas in baseball, even, you're more constrained. Like everybody's playing at the same time in that given matchup versus in a tournament. You are completely at the whim of whatever time comes out of the USGA's lottery ball machine.
Yeah. And golf is an individual sport, whereas baseball is, one team against another. I think that in an individual sport, there's more room for those individuals to claim unfairness, or that they didn't get a proper shake in the proceedings. And so, golf definitely sets itself up to these situations where people might perceive some unfairness, and that to me, that's part of what makes the game so interesting. But I want to touch on a couple other factors that I think sometimes lead people to say that a golf course is unfair. One has to do with categories of par, because I get the sense that many players really hate when a par 3 can't easily be reached in one shot, or a par 4 can't easily be reached in 2 shots. They believe that some kind of decent strike of the ball should reliably yield a chance at a 2-putt par. And they object to holes that push at the boundary of a higher par category. So they'll object to a par 4 that maybe kind of is almost a par 5, or object to a par 3 that's almost a par 4. Now, moving in the other direction, they don't tend to complain if there's a par 4 that's almost a par 3. And so I think that this complaint about golf courses tends to be a little more easily dismissed. I don't think this is a matter of fairness. I think it's a matter of people's perception of par categories.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants the red numbers, right? They don't like it when you make.
It seems to be more about ego than actually about the golf course.
Yeah, I think if it was just if the goal was, which the goal is, but if it was framed as get around in as few shots as possible compared to everybody else, I feel like people would have less problems with maybe that kind of stuff.
And then the last area where I think people sometimes object to golf courses as unfair would be just when they see unexpected things, like when they see elements of a golf course that they're not used to seeing. So this might be a bunker in the middle of a fairway. That's unfair, or a blind shot. That's unfair. But the reason those things might be perceived as unfair, I don't think is that they're inherently unfair. It's more that they're just unexpected and unusual.
So from that standpoint of like a centerline bunker or something crazy, you could even I mean, Andy talked a lot about it at Oakmont with the setup in the rough. Like, where is the line to you, golf courses are, between gimmick and fair? Because I feel like the Mayakovsky cave bunker, that's just a gimmick, right? That's there. Everybody knows it's there. It's not really a matter of fair or not. It's just I feel like if it's there is a line that maybe crosses it. Maybe the rough at Oakmont could arguably cross it. Whereas it's not a question of fair anymore. This is just it's a joke gimmick of a setup.
Right. At Oakmont, the rough started to seem to some people to be almost a gimmick. And I think it probably was, but I was somewhat okay with it because the history, the deep history of that course is very based on this idea that any shot off the fairway should be very severely punished. That was baked in to the identity of the course from the beginning. And so I don't think that justifies everything in a golf course design. You can't just go crazy just because somebody 120 years ago thought it was a good idea. But if it does have some sort of tradition and link to the identity of a golf course, then I tend to be more okay with it. I tend to also be more okay with it if a feature is based on some kind of natural pre-existing landform. And so actually the cave bunker at Mayakovsky, I mean, that's a natural landform, right?
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, it's not... I think the cave bunker at Mayakovsky is almost like a tourist attraction as opposed to a real golf course feature, because it doesn't seem to me to be all that much in play even. I might be wrong about that, but it just seems to be there for people to take photos of it. Yeah. And so that's I guess a little bit silly. But this is a great question, though, and I don't have an easy answer to it. In fact, this is like another episode of the podcast in and of itself. What constitutes a gimmick in golf course design? Because I don't know, when people first saw the Island Green at TPC Sawgrass, it must have seemed kind of gimmicky because it was so unusual and so obviously constructed. There's no way anybody could look at that and think, oh, well, Pete Dye just found that there.
Yeah, that was just there. Yeah.
But now we're so used to it that it doesn't seem as gimmicky. Mm-hmm. So I think what we perceive to be a gimmick, it goes back to this issue of what I was talking about earlier, what we expect to see on a golf course and what we don't expect to see. And, architects have to work with those perceptions a little bit. If they introduce too many things that people would consider a gimmick, too many unexpected things into a golf course, then they can't be surprised when people regard it as gimmicky. but they can also challenge people, push against their expectations, and occasionally introduce things that might be accused of gimmickry, but have a certain purpose and philosophy behind them. And then eventually, maybe down the line, years down the line, those features will be accepted as less gimmicky and more familiar. This episode of Designing Golf is brought to you by the USGA Green Section. Now, you've probably heard about the USGA's data collection tools, the GS3 ball and the new USGA moisture meter. I've talked about both of those tools on past episodes of Designing Golf. Paired with the USGA's Deacon course management system, these tools collect data and create digital records that give you insights into the performance of your playing surfaces. But what makes these tools work even harder for you is the person that comes with every purchase, your customer success agronomist, or CSA. The CSA not only gives tech support and product education, but can also assist in using this technology to better understand and improve your agronomic plan. Meet Brian Powell, the USGA customer success agronomist with over 30 years of experience in the industry. Brian is the director of agronomy at Old Chatham Golf Club and a past president of the Carolinas Golf Course Superintendents Association. And he has served on many boards, panels, and task forces. Brian is just part of the USGA support that you get with the Deacon management system and the USGA Green Section's data collection tools. So check out what the USGA Green Section is offering. A lot of great stuff. All right, let's get back to the episode. So let's go on to talking about a few specific features that might be deemed unfair in certain players' minds. This was the other part of the prompt that I gave you yesterday. What are specific features that you would consider, or that just people might consider unfair on a golf course? Let's get specific.
Well, the number one thing that popped into my head, and not to sound like a lovely Twitter account known as Use Golf Facts when I say this, but I do think there is something to the idea of maybe pin positioning or even bunker positioning or penalty positioning, however you want to phrase it, that you're only impacting a player of one handiness or a player that only plays one type of shot if you're putting all of the penalties or bunkers or hazards in one side of the course. I feel like having a disparity, relatively even placing of pins and everything is probably the easiest way to get something fair. So if you have a course where you don't have that many green locations and every pin is tucked to the right side, are you discriminating against somebody that plays a draw?
Are you after Patrick and Justine Reed? Should you be sued? Should the Clayman send you a cease and desist?
I didn't want to go there, but ironically enough, it was the first thing that I thought of. That I could see how somebody could get really angry about that if that was a repeated issue for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a good point. What rationale is there to put pins in different places on a green, if not fairness and equity to all golfers playing the course? Why would you do that if it were not for this concept of fairness? So I think that's a really good example. And let's put that in the knapsack. And what others do you have?
Bunkers was my second one. On more again, are you putting them on the front of every green versus the back side of every green? Like where are the bunkers placed? I feel like is in my mind, are you giving, this is maybe not a PGA Tour sentiment, but for a normal player, are you giving them the opportunity to use the ground and run it up to a green versus is every green guarded in the front by bunkers so that you have to go in the air and you're not playing the ball on the ground, again, as we've gone over, as was originally intended by this game, some would argue. So that was another one to me. And then I kind of just thought maybe penalty areas, like the overdoing of water specifically, I feel like is probably a good one to point out as somebody that lives on Long Island where there's a lot of water on a lot of golf courses. I feel like this is just, it's kind of stupid.
Listen, if you ever end up in Florida, and
Yeah.
many people who grow up in Long Island do eventually end up in Florida, you'll find even more of that.
Exactly. So I feel like the use of hazards, penalties, however you want to say it, are you overdoing it? Is it not so much not random, but is it just borderline unplayable? I mean, you look at some of the holes that we do on Design Disasters, where it's just like, what is the point of any of this? Lost Marsh, every fairway is a peninsula. Like, this is just stupid. That's a gimmick, but it's more just stupid. And I don't know if it's quote unquote unfair, but it's certainly not. You're not identifying the best golfer in a tournament there when anybody could just end up in the water at any given time.
Yes, that would be where the idea of fairness would come in, I suppose, is that golf courses with so much water on them create such a difference between just being on the fairway and being off the fairway. The difference between those positions is so stark in the case of water that if you repeat it enough, it could certainly be said to become unfair. And I would say that the same accusation has been made of out of bounds too, because the disparity is so big between just being right inside the out of bounds line and being outside of the out of bounds line. I mean, a huge disparity there. Some players could say that's unfair. Okay, so those are two good ones. I want to introduce a few that have been, I think, really common in this discourse about fairness. One key one is undulating fairways. This was a big bone of contention among people who discussed golf architecture back at the beginning of the 20th century. This was one of the main topics in this fairness discussion. Should fairways be heavily undulating? And the reason I think that this was such a big topic was that people were trying to figure out how to build golf courses inland. Mm-hmm. And one thing about inland golf course properties is that they didn't tend to have the natural undulation, constant undulation of linksland properties. And links golf courses were, of course, the first golf courses. They were the examples that everybody discussed and compared new golf courses to. And so when they started to build golf courses inland, one of the big questions was, well, we don't have natural undulation here. Should we build it? Should we construct it? Is that an important part of the game? And one side would argue, no, it's not an important part of the game. In fact, it's a less ideal part of the game because you can hit it in the middle of the fairway on an undulating fairway. Two players can hit the exact same shot, and one might end up with a weird uphill or side hill lie, and one might end up with a flat lie. And there's really no controlling that when you have undulations like they have at the old course at St. Andrews. And so what we should do, in fact, is intentionally, if we're going to construct anything, we should construct flat fairways so that players get approximately the same lies if they hit the fairway. Then there was another faction that argued, that's ridiculous. That makes the game boring. A big part of the charm of golf is exactly this linksland undulation. We shouldn't be taking that out of golf courses. In fact, in some cases, we might want to introduce it to golf courses. So this was a big issue of fairness that people argued about back in this kind of key period of golf architecture history around the turn of the 20th century. What do you make of that debate about undulating fairways?
I feel like it's just part of the game at that point. Like I could see the argument that if you are artificially creating it and not going with the land and not using what you've been given, some could call it a gimmick, maybe, if you overuse it. I get that aspect.
So it seems like part of what a big part of what a gimmick might be is that it's contrived or obviously constructed, that somebody went in there and made it as opposed to encountered it in the landscape. And if you think about that, this is so connected to our perception that golf is a game played in a natural setting. If it's a game played in a natural setting, we have a much bigger acceptance of randomness and quirks that might lead to unfairness. If we consider it a purely manufactured setting, I think our tolerance for those factors really goes down.
Yeah, like I feel like if you are just bulldozing a bunch of trees and you decide to build a giant hill for no reason, then like that, and you, in theory, people would be able to tell, like, to some extent, that you just made this, then like, yeah, that's kind of stupid, and I would argue that it's unfair. But if that's just the way the cookie crumbled and these glaciers moved however many millions of years ago, then again, I would just go with it's an outdoor sport. Like, sorry, you'll get the next one. Like, on the aggregate, sure, there are people that are just blatantly unlucky, but at the end of the day, I feel like everything's going to relatively come out in the wash or be as close to 50-50 good break, bad break as possible. Maybe on a certain day, you just get hosed, but then you come back tomorrow and you get the good breaks. Like, outdoor sport, man. Can't complain about that.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. And I think, moreover, that if we're talking about fairness, if we're talking about the test of skill, a golf course assessing a player's level of skill as part of the fairness of the golf course overall, right? Because if a golf course is fair, then that means probably it's testing the skill of players above all.
Yep.
Then you could even argue that undulating fairways make a golf course more fair or a better test of skill, in the sense that these courses require players to hit shots off of uneven lies on occasion. Yep. And it's unlikely that any given golfer over 72 holes or whatever length the tournament is going to get consistently worse lies than any other golfer. They tend to get sort of approximately the same number of breaks, the same number of side hill, uphill, downhill lies.
Well, if you listen to Brandel and he quotes his favorite statistic of strokes gained good breaks, then you have to pay attention. This is something we should be tracking.
Yeah, what I'm saying might not be completely. I do think over 72 holes, there's a lot of room for variance, obviously, and some players do get more lucky over the course of a tournament than others. So I'll give some credit to Brandel there, but I think it tends to kind of come out in the wash.
Yeah, and who, like, it happens, right? Like, that's the game that we're playing here. Like, sorry, you're gonna get a good break or a bad break eventually. You could hit the wrong side of a hill on a green and run all the way back down. Like, that happened at the Wyndham 1,000 times last week. Like, it happens. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's kind of the game that we're all playing here, and obviously there's a bigger microscope on it at the professional level, but even that could happen to anybody. So, like, yeah, if you're building a giant hill for no reason, I don't know that I'd call it unfair. I'd call it stupid. I'd call it a gimmick. But if you are just on the side of a hill because that's where the fairway is and you got to hit a shot that's below your feet, then, like, that's part of the game. That's you have to be able to hit that shot at the end of the day.
Okay, let me give you another potentially unfair element of a golf course. Okay. And this one maybe will be better received by you. I'm guessing it'll be better received as potentially unfair than undulating fairways. And that is greens that don't tend to receive approach shots of the length required. So the simplest example of this would be you have a 250-yard par 3 and the green is fronted by a bunker. You kind of outlined a version of this scenario earlier. Say the approach is blocked and the green is shallow and you have another hazard in the back and the green tilts away from the player and the par 3 is 250 yards. Is that unfair?
Yeah, in a way. Like, I feel like you have to be, especially on a par 3, there has to be a way to hit the green, right?
Well, are
And
you being
hold the
devoted
green.
to par categories here, though? Why not just consider it a par 4, lay up, and then hit a pitch into the green?
That's a good point. That's a good point.
This is where it becomes tricky.
I feel like if you have that green and you know where people are going to be hitting it from, then you have to be able to reasonably assume that somebody can hold it with metal at that point. If you're not giving the opportunity to do that, and the easiest way to do that for at least amateurs would probably be to run it up to some extent. And if you're not giving people the opportunity to do that, then you're asking for big numbers. I would say it's probably a pace of play disaster at that point, which is never what anybody wants.
Yeah, it's probably just impractical
Yeah.
to a degree.
I would call it, I would lean that's more unfair than maybe hitting off the side of a hill in a fairway, unless you built that hill out of nothing, sure.
Okay. I think a lot of people agree with you. And I think that green design and the ways that greens can be receptive and unreceptive is the one area in which a lot of architects and architecture nerds suddenly become members of the fairness police. It's kind of funny when you see this happen. It is accepted as a principle of golf course design that greens should kind of be built for the length of the hole that they appear on. If you have a long par 4, then it's generally accepted that the green should accept a kind of low running longer shot. Whereas if you have a short par 4, it tends to be more accepted that the green can be small and unreceptive. If you have a long par 3 and a short par 3, the same thing. I mean, consider the 8th green at Oakmont versus the 7th green at Pebble Beach. One is very small and surrounded by hazards and has no room to run any shot up. That's the 7th hole at Pebble Beach. But everybody accepts that because it's a 100-yard shot. Whereas the 8th green at Oakmont, even though there are still obviously some people who did not like that hole and thought it was unfair, the green does receive longer shots. You can run the ball up. The green is big, and so it's pretty receptive.
So here's my thing on that. After seeing it in person and seeing it played for 6 days or whatever, I don't really get the unfair argument. I didn't get the whole big blow up about 8 at Oakmont. I didn't really understand it at all. Honestly, if you're a professional player, it kind of seemed like an easy hole. Just blow it up there, get up and down, get out.
Because of how the green was designed, right?
Yeah. Like, it honestly did not seem that bad. Even if you ended up in that bunker on the left, like, get up and down and cool, you're good. Like, it honestly didn't seem like a problem at all.
PJ, that was a great example of people not knowing ball. Pre-criticizing the 8th hole at Oakmont just because it was going to play 300 yards. I mean, please, get over yourselves. And of course, once the tournament started, all of those complaints just kind of disappeared. People were like,
I feel like it was like probably one of the more simple holes on the course. It was just like, I'm just going to blast it up there. I'm going to make a 3. Yeah. Worst case scenario, I'll make a 4. And that's it. Like,
Jeff Ogilvy actually said this in our interview with him. I'm not sure if it appeared in the video or not, but he said something to the effect of, well, the 8th hole is kind of a breather, even though it's a 300-yard par 3, it's a pretty simple hole, and success. You're not going to make a triple bogey there. And so you're just not that scared of it. Yeah. I think that hole has lost some of its teeth. It's become less of a good hole since players have become more able to reliably carry the ball through the air. Now that players can, you can pretty much be assured that you're going to hit the ball a certain length, especially if you're a professional. That hole is the point of it is kind of lost a little bit. So yeah, kind of a side note on the 8th hole at Oakmont. I think at one time that was a really cool nuanced par 3, but it's lost some of those complexities because you can just carry everything now. Those bunkers that kind of form a ring around the approach, those aren't that big of a factor. Players just hit it over them now. It used to be the case that you kind of had to land near them and run the ball up. And maybe for some amateur players, that's still the case, but it's not the same hole anymore.
So when outside of you mentioned like 7 at Pebble Beach, like that's a wedge for everybody. Like, you don't have to run that up. But what I was trying to say before, when you asked what might be unfair, I
Mm.
feel like for maybe not like a wedge shot par 3 is the one example that like that. I feel like it's commonly accepted. But I feel like if you're on a normal golf course for amateurs, reasonable people, I feel like you have to give some level of access to a green on the ground. At least something, right? Like I feel like if you have to fly it on every green, that's a lot. And I don't know that I'd call it unfair, but I'd call it mean.
Yeah, and maybe joyless.
Yeah.
The golf course isn't as fun. This brings in the idea of playability, which is again one of those words that's part of the word cloud here. The fairness word cloud, playability. It's not exactly the same as fairness. Playable and fair, those are, I think, related concepts in a lot of people's minds, but maybe not exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the same thing about the word equity. What you're talking about, giving players who hit lower trajectory shots and maybe have less ability, giving those players the ability to run the ball onto a green is, yes, maybe a question of fairness to those players. The hole is more fair to them because they can use that route. But it also overlaps with this concept of equity, building an equitable golf course that all players can play and enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the impulse to do that comes from a slightly different place than the impulse to build a perfectly fair golf course.
Sure.
If you're trying to build an equitable or playable golf course for the broadest number of people possible, yeah, I do think that overlaps with the concept of fairness, but it's not exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And so the ability to run the ball up is maybe more part of that discussion than part of the fairness discussion. But again, these things are a little bit hard to differentiate. What I'd like to do now, though, is go back to this question of green receptiveness, and apply it to a few very famous holes that maybe don't have very receptive greens and are maybe extremely exciting exactly because they are not fair in this specific way.
Mm-hmm.
The first one would have to be the road hole. There are a number of ways in which the road hole might be unfair. What are some of the ways in which you, from tee to green, the road hole, what kinds of elements does it have that might be deemed unfair?
Well, there's a building in the way, so I feel like that's the first one that stands out in my head.
Completely blind tee shot, and not even because there's a hill in front of you, but because there's a hotel.
Yeah, I definitely, thinking about how I play, I don't hit the ball very high, so I'm primarily worried about the building. That's anytime that I have to carry something that is above me off the tee, I'm moderately worried that I'm just gonna hit a worm burner and hit the wall.
You're a singles hitter, is what you're saying.
Yeah, big Mark Leishman, just taking it to right field. Going the other way. Not really worried about
slapping it out there.
Yeah. Not the prime Ichiro. Not really worried about the long ball these days. So there's a building for sure. Then you have the road itself, where if you tend to hit a cut and you're playing it down the right side of the fairway, you are obviously I guess that's more of a strategy decision than it is a matter of fairness, that if you decide to get risky and play towards the road, that's more of a you issue. But sure, that is obviously, the idea of that is daunting, whether you're near it or not, I guess. I've never been, but in my head, I would be scared because there's just a road right there anyway. And then the green is kind of angled so that if you're not coming at it from the right angle, it's got a giant bunker in front of it, and you're kind of screwed that way.
Yeah, an extremely punitive bunker.
Yeah.
Like, talk about a hazard that seems out of proportion with the size of the miss. The road bunker is the ultimate example of that, and even the road might be considered an example of that. So you have so many elements of this hole that would anger members of the fairness police if if those people were inclined to criticize a course like the old course, which maybe they seem a little bit less inclined to do because the old course has been with us for such a long time, and because it's so natural and it just kind of uses what's there, even if what's there is a bunch of man-made stuff. So the road hole does have so many elements of quote unquote unfairness about it, including, you mentioned that the green is kind of angled. If you bail out to the left, then it's very much harder to hit.
Mm-hmm.
I think the road green is probably hard to hit from pretty much everywhere. Yeah, it's definitely easier to hit if you've got the right angle. If you manage to kind of hug that out of bounds line. Hey, we have out of bounds too. There's another thing that you might consider unfair, but if you manage to end up on that right side of the fairway, you have an easier approach shot than you would if you're on the left side, but it's still very, very hard to hit a green of that size from that distance, because this is a long hole. The road hole is it might not be very long for Rory McIlroy anymore, but for the rest of us and for most of the history of golf, the road hole is very long for a par 4. Now, it wasn't always considered a par 4. It was considered a par 5. And maybe that's part of the reason why the green is the way it is. But now we consider it a par 4. And so players are in this situation where they feel like they have to hit their second shot on the green, but it's so difficult to pull off that shot that it almost seems unfair. And if you miss, then you're in the freaking road bunker or on the road itself, and those penalties, and you're screwed. And so the hole is almost ridiculous. And it definitely has many elements of unfairness about it. But there's no hole that people look forward to players playing more than this one. No holes that players look forward to playing themselves more than the road hole. And watching in tournaments as well. And so maybe it is exactly these elements of unfair, like it pushes at the boundaries of our taste for unfairness and doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't quite push us all the way over. And for that reason, it's a really great hole.
It's got the aura. It's got the gravitas. It's got,
that's part of it.
It's the road hole. Like, you can't get mad at it kind of thing.
Yeah, some players still do. For sure.
I'm sure Kirill Hatton loves the road hole. I'd love to get his thoughts. But
yeah, exactly.
I understand it from the highest level, why you might think this is out of proportion. I mean, a lot of the old course is out of proportion now at the highest level. Open the Cam Smith won at like 22 under. Like, it's not good. But
yeah.
I think for a normal player, you're more captivated by the scene and the environment and the history of the place to it's not good to be in that bunker and it's not good to be on that road. But I feel like I'm not going to be ranting and raving about how this is the most unfair thing I've ever seen. I would just be mad that I made an 8 on the road hole more than anything else. I would attribute that to user error more than I would course design.
You're not going to be in a critical frame of mind.
No.
Because the course has sort of wowed you.
Yeah.
Maybe even snowed you.
Yeah.
To, created a mist
yeah.
about itself where you can't quite see its potential flaws. But I think because the old course puts people in that frame of mind, that they're willing to maybe loosen up a little bit and have fun with a hole like the road hole. And once you're in that state of mind, you realize how fun potentially quote unquote unfair things can be.
Yeah.
The road hole is exciting. And I don't think it's just because of its aura. That's part of it. It has an aura. The old course has an aura.
Mm-hmm.
But the road hole is also exciting because of that potential for disaster. It is achievable, though. It's not like this hole is completely ridiculous where no player can play it well. We saw Lydia Ko hit an incredible fairway wood into this green that is just not designed to accept fairway wood shots. We wouldn't see that on any other hole in the world, except for maybe a couple of others that we can mention briefly. But part of the reason that shot was so exciting is that the green is not proportioned to receive it. And it has that little whiff of unfairness about it. And I think that's exactly what makes it fun.
So would you, in the context of the old course, then the unfairness, you have like a lot of the undulating fairways, but
Yeah.
I would say I feel like it's on a whole, I would argue it's probably even more fair than usual because you don't have to play it necessarily a certain way, that you can do so many more different things. There's not like a ton of rough out there. Like you can kind of just blast it around and still be like, I feel like that puts everybody on a level playing field to the point where it's hard to get mad about anything unfair. Maybe this is, I don't know a ton about links golf, but at least at the old course where it's pretty open, that like, it is what it is at that point. Even bad shots are not taking you out of the hole per se. And that on the whole makes it actually more fair, even if the road hole is kind of maybe potentially a gimmick.
This is where we might be redefining fair as equitable or playable.
Yeah.
Which I'm all in favor of. That is not notably how professionals tend to define fairness. Equitable and playability, those aren't big factors in the way that the Scotty Schefflers of the world think about fairness. They think about fairness as good shots being rewarded and bad shots being punished. If you, though, think about fairness instead as an extremely playable course that many different people of different stripes can enjoy, then the old course might be the ultimate example of an equitable and playable course. And that's a big part of why it inspired the likes of Alistair McKenzie. That's one of the big things that Alistair McKenzie loved about that course. It created the greatest pleasure for the greatest number because of this sense of kind of democracy about it, that any different kind of player could be successful there in their own way.
Seems like a good thing to me. I feel like I'm pro that. I understand why if you're competing in an open championship, maybe you would not want that, but that's fine.
Yeah. I would say in general, the old course is like that. The road hole might be a bit of an exception to that, though. If you play it as a 3-shot hole, if you lay up on your second shot, you might beat a lot of players who try to go for that green in two, which again, goes back to this idea of equity.
But that's I'm just trying to put myself in the mentality. It's like, I'm at the road hole. I'm not going to lay up. Like that's no, not,
of course
unless
not.
I have to. Like it's
kind of like if you're on the 16th tee at Cypress Point.
Yeah. Well, that
is it fair for there to be a 240 yard par 3 where you have to carry all ocean to get there? Is that fair? Well, guess what? You can lay up to the left if you want. Go ahead, man. Just try to, have your buddy stand behind you with a phone filming you hitting an iron.
How do you explain that to people? Oh, I went 8 iron. I went 8 iron pitching wedge. Sorry.
I made par, man. I got up and down. Come on.
That's what you lead with people. I made par on 16 at Cypress. Don't ask me how I got there.
That's that if a friend says that to you, then you know that you need to move away from that friend potentially. It's probably not a fun person. But in any case, you're right that the road hole kind of baits you into doing the not smart thing. I would say there are a lot of examples of holes like the road hole that have big elements of unfairness about them, and those are exactly the elements that make them super exciting to watch. The postage stamp hole at Royal Troon is a good example. There's so much chance there because it's so windy, that part of the course. It's an elevated tee, you're up, you're vulnerable to the wind, and that green is so small, so severe, with such penalizing hazards around it that two players can hit pretty good wedge shots into there, and one might end up in the coffin bunker and one might end up 5 feet from the pin.
So I was going to bring up the coffin bunker before, like exactly that example. Like, would you? I don't want to call it coffin bunkers a gimmick because it's been there for however many years, hundreds of years, but I feel like it's kind of maybe unfair to some extent. Right?
I think it 100% is. It absolutely is. And that entire hole, I mean, the size of the green, the way the tee is situated, how much the wind affects you in that little shot. I don't think that hole is purely a test of skill. Now, it might be a test of mettle and psychological strength.
That's what
sure.
really matters at the end of the day. So
yeah, I mean, you could say it's a test of skill in that way, certainly. But there's such a big element of randomness there, and the line between success and absolute dire failure is so thin that it's hard to call any part of that whole fair. But what does everybody want to do when they go to Royal Troon? What does everybody want to watch when they go to an Open Championship at Royal Troon? They want to go to that hole and see what happens. I would say the same thing of the 15th hole at Augusta National. Is that green built to receive any kind of shot at this point? Now, this might enter into a discussion of green speeds and how you match a green's severity of slope with the speed of the green. But putting that aside for a second, the 15th hole at Augusta National is almost ridiculous because of how severe the green is. But what is the most, where have we seen the most exciting shots in recent Masters tournaments? It's at the 15th hole at Augusta National, exactly because we know how unreceptive that green is. It's achievable. Rory can, bend a 7-iron around the trees and hold the green, but you have to hit an extremely exceptional shot, and you have to get a little bit lucky probably.
I feel like the landing area on 15 is so small that you can reasonably, no matter where the pin is, like you have to be on that upper tier. And if you're above it, as we saw with Rory, you're screwed at that point then too, because it's impossible. You can't ship it coming back the same way.
Yeah.
So I feel like that, I don't know, like when you're picking out these iconic holes, I feel like it's hard to criticize them because they provide these moments in time that are etched in everybody's memories. But like for a normal player, I guess maybe my theory of fairness, as you kind of just said, has evolved throughout this last hour or whatever we've been going on here. Is for the professionals, I agree with Scotty, I agree with Joseph, is that, wayward drives should be penalized more than decent drives, then good drives should not be screwed with at all.
It's frustrating for a lot of people, fans included, if that's not the case. It's frustrating to watch a player blow it like Wyndham Clark did on the 18th hole at LACC a couple of years ago. People are still really pissed about that. Now I have my notes about why that shot isn't what people thought it was, but it is clearly an example of people being frustrated by a lack of penalty for what was perceived to be a poor shot.
Yeah, so I'm with that professionally, but I think at the amateur level, I feel like I would be more about playability and equitability and making sure that everybody has a path to, you don't have to be good, but everybody has a path to finishing the hole. Whereas like some of these, like if I get stuck in the coffin bunker, I'm sorry. Like I'll hit like 2 shots. I'm not going to be able to get out. Sorry, I'm going home. Like that's it. It's not going to be
You're
fun.
Not going home though. You're going to finish the course, and then you'll have a nice story for your buddies about what happened to you on the postage stamp.
Exactly. But that I feel like there should be a path for everybody of varying skill levels. Maybe I'm just saying that the Old Course is the greatest place in the world, which might not be my worst take. I've had worse takes than that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would accept that, both past and present. I think that's a really good nuanced view of the situation, that the requirements or the goals of professional tournament courses are and should be different from those of courses meant to appeal to amateurs. Of course, this becomes a little tricky when you have courses that are meant to do both. And some courses do that better than others. Pinehurst number 2 and the Old Course are probably the best examples of courses that can do both for a variety of reasons. There's
not a lot of rough, and you can bunt it up on every green. Like I feel like that opens you up to a lot as a bad player, that you can still challenge the professionals with the kind of roulette wheel of what does your lie look like in this tough.
Perfectly stated, and I agree. Now, I do want to finish, though, on a brief monologue in support of cultivating little bits of unfairness in golf course design. If you had a perfectly fair golf course, in whether we're talking about fair in the professional sense or fair in the amateur sense that you've outlined, it would be, I think, boring and charmless. It would become predictable. But equally true is that a perfectly unfair golf course would be ridiculous. So we need a combination of that. If we accept that a perfectly fair golf course and a perfectly unfair golf course would be both unacceptable, then we have to live somewhere between those poles.
Yes.
So we do want a course to give an advantage to skilled players, but that's not all that we want a golf course to do. So I think, a well-designed golf course will strike some sort of balance between fairness and unfairness, between randomness and order, between skill and luck, right? There needs to be some kind of balancing act between all of those dichotomies in a golf course that's going to stand the test of time and be exciting to play, and also test skill in a way that we find fair and acceptable. So I guess what this means is that if you're an architect, you have to figure out ways to cultivate a little bit of randomness or luck or even unfairness on your golf courses without going overboard and falling into something that's unreasonable, unplayable, or absurd. Because, insisting on fairness at all times is not a good recipe for design. And the most fair golf courses, the rigorously fair golf courses that have been built over the history of golf architecture, have tended to fall out of favor, not stand the test of time very well, and have tended to be redesigned to reintroduce some more quirk and eccentricity and unexpectedness into them. So at the same time, we can say that insisting on fairness is not a good recipe for design. Neither is disregarding the concept of fairness entirely. And so ultimately, I do think we have to live between these extremes in some way or another, and different golf courses might have more of an element of unfairness than others, but all golf courses need to find their particular blend of that. I guess that would be my argument. How do you feel about that?
I think there has to be some level of randomness. If you want to call randomness unfair, like, to me, I don't know that those are the same thing. We're talking about the gray area between playability and fairness and all of that. To me, randomness and unfair are not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, there's a difference between an architect saying, I'm going to try to make this a little random somehow, versus I'm going to create a feature that just screws the player over.
Yes.
Those are maybe two different things.
I think those are not necessarily the same definition. So I would be pro randomness as, again, this is an outdoor sport. You need to have some level of, it's, player versus player. It's player versus self mentality, but it's also player versus nature, and you're trying to beat the course, and the course can fight back a little bit. But I feel like when you start to get into the unfairness of, I wouldn't go so far as the rewarding bad shots is not necessarily the right term, but not penalizing them or not penalizing them enough. That's where I think you start to lean into the little too much randomness, not enough fairness for at least in a professional setting.
Yeah, maybe so. And we all have our different levels of tolerance for what constitutes something that is outright unfair as opposed to, charmingly random or natural seeming or whatever you want to say. My position on this issue is probably always going to be in favor of promoting more unfairness than people are comfortable with. And part of the reason for that is that I think over the past 200 years or so, golfers have become very, very much less accustomed to unfairness. If we were to be transported back 150 years to the links courses of the 1800s, we would find those courses so extraordinarily unfair that we would hardly want to play them. Possibly. I mean, I think I would still want to be, I would be fascinated by them, but you'd hit the ball in the middle of the fairway and get terrible lies all the time because of the state of agronomy at the time. You know, the hazards are not going to, the bunkers are not going to be raked. There would be all sorts of things about those very natural golf courses that would strike us as unfair. And I think the story of golf and golf architecture to a great degree has been to introduce gradually more and more fairness into the game through architecture and agronomy, to the point where players have gotten very used to certain things that just weren't there in the original game. And so my position is always going to be, I'm going to promote some more unfair, I'm going to advocate for that, but also, just to be intellectually honest, I have to acknowledge that fairness is an important thing to think about in design. You can't have a completely unfair golf course. You just can't. It would be stupid and it would not be fun. And so I have to take a balanced position while at the same time being an advocate for one side of it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. I think you made a great point there about even like as far as like agronomy, where you have the perfect lies in the fairway and you're not running into some weeds or grass or anything, like how far things have come. Like everything is so optimized, even for normal people at this point. Like,
yeah, I mean, municipal golf courses that I play in Portland are so much more consistently maintained than anything anybody would have played even 50 years ago.
I think like that's a great point that I hadn't even considered, that like, yeah, the development of turf at even just a municipal level, like that has gotten to the point where that's taking out so many dice rolls that would have been there 50 years ago. That, yeah, I think any use of the elements, I feel like I'm going to end up being pro that. I think that's cool. Again, like I'm not here to have every shot go perfectly if I hit it well. I don't think that is fair, even though it is quote unquote perfectly fair. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that to be true. Like bad bounces are part of the game. We're doing this outside. The wind could adjust anything. Like all of that to me is part of what you sign up for. But the unfair at the municipal level, I would say, would be unplayable to a wide to the full population. You have to give everybody
or just
a chance.
Like way more playable for one type of player than another.
Yeah, give everybody a chance. But at the professional level, I think it's the goal should be to identify the guy who played the best that week in a tournament. And I feel like a lot of times we don't necessarily get that.
Yeah, well, and we don't get that, not necessarily because of, well, maybe because of unfairness to a degree, but not because of interesting unfairness. No. Usually it's just because the course is kind of too easy, too soft.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of that is a separate issue. But yeah, a very, very interesting distinction that you've made between kind of what we expect of a tournament course versus what we expect from a course that we all play on a daily basis. And I think that's a very valid thing for a golf course designer to think about, and for a golfer to think about when they're assessing a golf course. Like, try to figure out what the purpose of the golf course is, and does it succeed in that objective. And I think that's totally okay to think of courses in that way.
Yeah, I mean, once we're all playing the new double dot that has made Cameron Young the greatest golfer of all time, I think all of this will get changed anyway. We'll all be on the same level playing field.
Well, so. Yeah, equity will no longer be an issue because we're all hitting it like young Cam. All right, PJ, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you for coming on this episode of Golf Architecture 101. Hope it was fun.
Oh, this is great. Great to get a little lesson about what Sheriff Scotty's teaching to his comrades out there.
This episode of Designing Golf was produced by Will Balsam. Thank you, Will. If you're enjoying designing golf, then I can guarantee that you would love what we're doing in Fried Egg Golf Club. Go to thefriedegg.com/membership to see what FEGC is all about. But we're building a great community in there of avid golfers and golf nerds. We gather around and we discuss the issues of the game in a way that's really, really enjoyable. So we'd love for you to join us in there. Again, thefriedegg.com/membership. And also, if you're liking the podcast, then give us a rating or review wherever you might be listening to us. It's always good to get some feedback. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back again soon with another episode.